Hello, students. Today I'm going to tell you a story. The name of the story is The Happy Prince. It is written by Oscar Wilde. You can read it thoroughly. It is the first chapter of your reading book, The Happy Prince and Other Stories. This story is about the statue of a happy prince and a little swallow. The Happy Prince was a beautiful statue stood on a tall column high above the city. The statue was covered up with thin leaves of fine gold. He had two bright sapphires for his eyes and a large red ruby on his sword, on the handle of its sword. The statue was admired by everyone. Everyone used to praise its beauty. It looked splendid, beautiful, marvelous. One night, a swallow, a bird. One night, a swallow flew over the city. The swallow was on the way to Egypt and wanted some rest. The swallow saw the statue of the Happy Prince and decided to spend a night in between the feet of the Happy Prince. As the swallow was ready to sleep, just then a large drop of water fell on him. It was so strange, as there were no clouds in the sky. Then another water fell on him, and another one. The swallow decided to look for some another place. And just then again a drop of water fell on him. It was for strange for the swallow. Swallow noticed that the water was coming out of the eyes of the statue, the Happy Prince. He was crying. The swallow asked the prince for the reason for his unhappiness. The prince told him that when he was alive, he used to stay happy in his palace. He had never seen the misery of the people around the world because he was always happy during his lifetime. He had spent his life in pleasure. He had never seen any misery. And he also stayed uninformed of his people during his lifetime. But when he died, his statue was erected on a tall column over the city. He became sad because he could see the misery, the unhappiness, the sadness of the people in the city from that tall column, how people were suffering. And he became sad to see all this. As I told you, the prince's sculpture, the statue, was covered with gold and many precious jewels. His body was covered up with gold leaves. His eyes had two splendid sapphires, and there was an enormous red ruby that was shining on his sword handle. The sculpture, the statue of the Happy Prince, looked marvelous, and everyone praised the beauty of it. When the bird saw the prince's eyes filled with tears on seeing the misery of the people, he decided to become the messenger of the prince to make him happy again. The bird said that he would stay with the prince. He would help the prince to make people happy in the city. This made the prince glad, happy that he could help the poor people with the help of the bird. So first of all, the prince asked the swallow to take the ruby from his sword and give it to the needy seamstress who had no money to take care of his ailing son. Seamstress, a woman who stitches clothes and earns money for living, that is called seamstress. So the prince wanted to give the ruby to the seamstress who had no money to take care of her ailing son. Ailing means the ill son. Her son was ill and he had no money. She had no money for his treatment. The prince wanted to help that lady, the seamstress, by giving her the ruby. The bird did as the prince commanded. He gave the ruby to that lady, to the seamstress. The prince asked the little bird to stay and help him as he could not move from that place. Once the swallow had helped the prince, now prince was happy and the prince wanted the swallow to stay with him. But the swallow had to go to the Egypt, as I told you in the beginning of the story. The swallow wanted to go to the Egypt, but on prince's request, the swallow said okay. He was ready to help the prince. And then again, the next time, the prince asked the bird to take out one sapphire from his eye and offer it to the poor dramatist. Dramatist, you know, the one who writes plays, the playwright. So he asked the bird to give one sapphire of his eye to the dramatist, to the playwright who could not afford to make fire during winter to proceed with his composition. Actually, the playwright had to write one play and give it to the producer on time, but he was unable to do it because he had no fire at his place and he was very weak and hungry also. Because of that hunger and weakness, he was unable to finish his writing of the play. So the bird followed the prince's instruction and gave one of the sapphire, one of the prince's eye, to that dramatist. And then again, one day, the prince noticed a match girl who was ruthlessly beaten by her father for allowing her matches to fall in the canal. The prince's heart was filled with pain, and he promptly asked the swallow to pluck out his other eye and help the young lady. However, the swallow was unwilling to do so. The swallow didn't want to do this, as it would make the prince totally blind, totally visually impaired, because he had already given one eye, one sapphire of his eye, to a needy person. Now again, the another eye also he wants to donate, but swallow didn't want to do it. But prince insisted the swallow to do it. He requested to help that poor girl. The swallow plucked another sapphire and gave it to that girl. Thereafter, the compassionate bird, the kind bird, chose not to leave the prince, who was completely blind at this point. Now, the prince had become blind because he had already donated both the eyes, both the sapphires, which were his eyes. Now he couldn't see anything, and now Swallow told the prince that he would stay with him forever, and the swallow wanted to serve as his eyes. Despite the fact that prince couldn't see the distress or suffering of the people anymore. The bird stayed with the prince. Upon the instructions of the prince, the swallow removed the fine gold leaves from his body and offered it to the poor people. The bird obediently followed the prince's words and took out leaf after leaf of the gold till the happy prince looked very dull and somber. So all the beauty of the statue was due to that gold, that shining leaves of gold and those jewels, ruby and sapphires. Now there were no gold, ruby or sapphires, and the statue was no more beautiful now. Soon winter came and there was snow everywhere, and the bird became colder and colder. It was very cold now. Despite being weary and cold, the swallow didn't leave the prince. Swallow could have left the prince, but he didn't leave him because he was very kind at heart. Eventually, the swallow became weak. The swallow became frail and died from exhaustion, died due to extreme cold weather. Just then, there was a sudden curious crack that came from inside the sculpture, the statue, as though something had broken. So, what was that sound? As soon as the bird died, the swallow died, there was a cracking sound, and it was the heart of the prince that had broken into two pieces because the prince was unable to bear the death of the swallow, the kind swallow. So it was broken into two pieces due to the sudden demise. Demise means death. Sudden death, demise of the sweet and kind swallow. The sculpture, the statue, was therefore no more valuable and beautiful like before because there were no gems or gold on it. Its beauty was lost as it has donated everything to the poor and needy people. It stood abandoned, lonely. When the mayor and the town councillor saw the dull statue of the prince, they ordered to pull it down. Soon after, they melted the sculpture in furnace. Yet the broken heart didn't melt. Thus, it was thrown away on a dust heap as it was useless for the people. They threw it away on a dust heap where the dead body of the swallow was also lying. Soon, God requested one of his angels to bring the two most valuable things in the city. The angel brought the laden heart of the prince and the dead swallow as the two most precious things from the city. God warmly welcomed the two beings in his garden of paradise and regarded them as his charming creations. So, this is a beautiful story written by Oscar Wilde, which gives us the message that how beautiful it is to help the needy and the poor people. The statue of the prince and the swallow, both of them have set a great example before us. They sacrificed their life. Swallow sacrificed his life for the noble cause. The happy prince donated everything to the needy, to the poor people who was happy during his life, but when he became a statue, he was no more happy as he could see the suffering of the people being a statue on a high, tall column. So, this is the story. I hope you liked it. Now, you have to read this story from the book and underline the difficult words and find their meanings. Okay, bye bye.